On a cold February night in 1978, 5 friends left a basketball game in California. They were happy. They were excited. And they should have been home within an hour. But they never made it. Days later, search teams discovered their car abandoned high in the mountains, far from their route, far from civilization, and far from anywhere they had any reason to be. What happened next would become one of the strangest mysteries in American history, because when investigators finally found the men, nothing made sense. One was discovered inside a forest trailer surrounded by enough food to survive for months. Yet he had starved to death. Others were never fully found. And nearly 50 years later, nobody can explain why 5 friends drove into the darkness that night, or what they were running from. Welcome to the Midnight Archive. Tonight, we open the files of a case often called America's Dyatlov Pass. This is the story of the Yuba County 5, February 24, 1978. The town of Chico, California. Was settling into another quiet winter evening. 5 friends had traveled to watch a college basketball game. Their names were Jack Madruga, Bill Sterling, Ted Wire, Gary Mathias, and Jackie Whitt. They weren't criminals. They weren't thrill seekers. And they certainly weren't planning an adventure. In fact, they were looking forward to something much simpler. The next morning, they were scheduled to participate in a basketball tournament that they had been excited about for weeks. Family members later recalled how enthusiastic they were. Some had already laid out their clothes for the tournament. Others had talked nonstop about the upcoming event. Everything about that night suggested normality. The game ended. The friends climbed into Jack Madruga's turquoise Mercury Montego. Then they began the drive home. It should have been a straightforward journey. A little over an hour. Nothing unusual. Nothing dangerous. Nothing mysterious. Yet somewhere between the basketball arena and home, something happened. Around midnight, a store clerk in a small mountain town reported seeing several men matching their description. The sighting seemed insignificant at the time, but later it would become one of the most important clues in the entire case. Because the location made absolutely no sense. The town was nowhere near their route home. To reach it, the men would have needed to drive deep into the mountains, into isolated wilderness, into freezing temperatures, into the darkness. Why? No one knew. The following morning, panic began spreading among their families. The basketball tournament started, but the 5 friends never arrived. Hours passed, then days. Still nothing. Parents called hospitals, police stations, friends, anyone who might know where they were. No answers came. The men had vanished. As concern turned into fear, search efforts began expanding across Northern California. Investigators initially assumed a simple explanation. Maybe the car had broken down. Maybe they were stranded somewhere. Maybe there had been an accident. But as the days passed, those possibilities became less convincing. Then came the breakthrough. 4 days after the disappearance, a forest ranger discovered Jack Madruga's Mercury Montego. It sat abandoned on a remote mountain road near Rogers' cow camp. More than 70 miles away from where it should have been. The location shocked investigators. The road wound through rugged wilderness. Snow covered much of the area. Temperatures routinely dropped below freezing. Most importantly, there was absolutely no reason for the 5 men to be there. The car itself created even more questions. It wasn't damaged. It wasn't stuck. It still worked. There was fuel in the tank. No signs of mechanical failure. No evidence of a crash. Nothing suggested an emergency. Yet for some reason, all 5 men had left the vehicle behind and stepped into the freezing wilderness. Search teams examined footprints in the snow. The tracks indicated multiple people had walked away from the car. But where they went and why remained a mystery. As helicopters scanned the mountains and volunteers combed the forests, hope slowly began fading. Every passing day reduced the chances of finding the men alive. Winter conditions were brutal. Snowstorms swept across the region. Night temperatures plunged below freezing. The mountains became a deadly maze. Weeks turned into months. Then came the discovery that transformed the case forever. In June of 1978, nearly 4 months after the disappearance, a group of motorcyclists entered a remote section of the Plumas National Forest. What they found inside an abandoned Forest Service trailer would shock investigators. Inside lay the body of Ted Weiher, but that wasn't the strangest part. The trailer contained food. Plenty of it. Military emergency rations, canned goods, supplies capable of sustaining someone for a very long time. Yet Ted Weiher had died from starvation. How? Why hadn't he eaten the available food? The answer remains one of the most disturbing mysteries of the entire case, and investigators were only beginning to uncover the truth. What they discovered next would raise even more questions than answers. The abandoned trailer stood alone in the wilderness, surrounded by dense forest, hidden beneath months of snow, and hundreds of feet above the nearest road. For investigators, simply reaching the location was difficult. But understanding what had happened there would prove nearly impossible. As police carefully examined the trailer, they noticed something strange. Someone had clearly been living inside. A bed had been prepared. Blankets were arranged. Personal items had been moved. Evidence suggested that at least one of the missing men had survived for weeks after entering the mountains. Perhaps even months. That realization changed everything. This wasn't a simple accident. It wasn't a sudden death caused by exposure. At least one member of the group had somehow stayed alive long after the others disappeared. But who? And what had happened during those lost weeks? The answer began emerging as investigators identified the body. It belonged to Ted Weiher. The condition of his remains revealed something disturbing. Medical experts estimated he had survived for nearly 3 months after the disappearance. 3 months. While his family searched desperately. While volunteers combed the mountains. While authorities wondered whether the group was still alive, Ted had remained hidden inside the trailer, fighting for survival, alone. Yet the circumstances surrounding his death made no sense. The trailer contained food lockers, emergency supplies, matches, fuel, everything necessary to stay alive, but much of it had never been touched. Boxes of food remained unopened. Rations sat untouched. Even more puzzling, investigators discovered equipment that could have provided heat. Yet it appeared largely unused. Why? Why would someone slowly starve while surrounded by resources? The mystery deepened when investigators examined Ted's physical condition. His beard growth and weight loss suggested a prolonged struggle. He hadn't died immediately. He had endured weeks of suffering, weeks of isolation, weeks of waiting for someone or something nearby. Search teams uncovered another clue. A pair of shoes belonging to Ted. But they weren't on his feet. Evidence suggested another member of the group may have taken them. Which meant Ted likely wasn't alone when he first entered the trailer. Someone had been with him. The question was, who? As investigators expanded their search around the area, more discoveries followed. Not far from the trailer, searchers located skeletal remains. The body belonged to Jack Madruga, the owner of the Mercury Montego, the man who had driven the group into the mountains. Nearby lay the remains of Bill Sterling. The evidence suggested both men had died from exposure while attempting to navigate the wilderness. The freezing temperatures had claimed them, but the timeline still didn't fit. If Jack and Bill died relatively early, who had helped Ted survive inside the trailer? And where were the remaining 2 men? The search continued. Then investigators found another set of remains, this time belonging to Jackie Whitt. His body was discovered miles away from the others, scattered across rugged terrain. The location suggested he had wandered through the mountains for an extended period before succumbing to the elements. Now 4 of the 5 friends had been accounted for. Only 1 remained missing, and that missing man would become the center of countless theories. His name was Gary Mathias. Unlike the others, Gary stood out. He had served in the military. He possessed wilderness survival skills, and according to family members, he was physically capable and resourceful. If anyone in the group could survive in harsh conditions, it was Gary. Yet investigators never found his body. Not then. Not now. Even after decades of searching, Gary Mathias simply vanished. His disappearance transformed an already bizarre case into a legend. Some investigators believed Gary had reached the trailer with Ted. Perhaps he cared for him during the early weeks. Perhaps he gathered supplies. Perhaps he left in search of help. If that theory is true, Gary may have walked away from the trailer and disappeared into the mountains forever. But others believed something more sinister occurred, because strange witness reports had emerged almost immediately after the disappearance. One witness claimed to have experienced a terrifying encounter on the same mountain road where the Mercury Montego was later discovered. The man reported suffering a heart attack while driving through the area that night. As he sat helpless inside his vehicle, he claimed he saw another car, then several men, and a woman carrying a baby. The witness later stated he called out for help, but whoever was outside ignored him. At one point, he believed a group of flashlight beams moved through the darkness. Then vanished. For years, investigators debated the account. Was it reliable? Could the witness have mistaken what he saw due to his medical condition? Or had he unknowingly observed the Yuba County Five during their final hours? The possibility remains haunting. If true, it means the men were alive that night, confused, lost, and perhaps not alone. Because another question continued troubling investigators. Why did they leave the car? The Mercury Montego wasn't trapped. It wasn't buried in snow. In fact, later tests showed the vehicle could have been driven away. The men had abandoned a working car, a warm shelter, their best chance of survival, and walked into the freezing wilderness instead. People rarely make such decisions without a reason. So, what was the reason? One theory suggested fear. Perhaps they encountered someone threatening. Someone who forced them off their route. Someone who made remaining in the vehicle feel more dangerous than fleeing into the darkness. But no evidence ever confirmed that scenario. Another theory involved confusion. Several members of the group had intellectual disabilities. Perhaps they became disoriented. Perhaps a wrong turn escalated into panic. Perhaps they genuinely believed they were heading towards safety. Yet even that explanation struggles to answer all the questions, because Gary Mathias knew the region better than the others. Would he have allowed such a mistake? And why travel deeper into danger rather than turn around? The mystery only grows stranger when considering the trailer itself. Someone had enough awareness to locate shelter. Someone understood survival. Someone wrapped Ted carefully in sheets and blankets. Someone took steps that suggested organization and planning. Those actions don't reflect total confusion. They suggest purpose, decision-making, perhaps leadership. Which brings investigators back to Gary Mathias. Many believe he was the person responsible. Many believe he kept Ted alive. Many believe he later left the trailer seeking rescue. And many believe he never returned. But belief is not proof. The truth remains buried somewhere in the mountains. Or perhaps somewhere else entirely. Nearly 50 years have passed since 5 friends attended a basketball game and vanished into one of America's greatest mysteries. Families have searched for answers. Investigators have proposed theories. Researchers have analyzed every detail. Yet no explanation fully accounts for what happened. Why was the car abandoned? Why did they enter the wilderness? How did Ted survive for months? Why were emergency supplies left untouched? And what became of Gary Mathias? These questions remain unanswered. Perhaps they always will. Some mysteries eventually reveal their secrets. Others refuse. The Yuba County Five belongs to the second category, a case suspended between fact and speculation, between evidence and uncertainty, a story that continues haunting investigators decades later. 5 friends left a basketball game expecting to return home. Only 4 were ever found, and somewhere beyond the forests, the snow-covered mountains, and the unanswered questions. The final chapter of this mystery remains unwritten, because until Gary Mathias is found, the story of the Yuba County Five is not over. It is still waiting, still hidden, still lost in the darkness, and perhaps still keeping its secrets.